HOA ruined my Christmas decorations, so I turned their holiday into a legal nightmare. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't even look surprised when the citation landed in my mailbox on December 22nd. Because the moment I read it, I already knew how this was going to end. That year, Christmas was the first time my house had felt like a home again. The divorce was finally behind me, the kids were back on a regular schedule, and for the first time in years, we were actually excited to decorate. Not over the top, not obnoxious, just warm white lights along the roofline, a wreath on the door, and a 6-foot inflatable Santa waving from beside the porch. Nothing blinking, nothing musical, nothing against the city code. But the HOA had other plans. The notice was printed on thick paper, stamped urgent in red, and signed by the same HOA president who'd been circling my house like a vulture since I moved in. Unauthorized holiday decorations, violation of community aesthetic standards, remove within 24 hours or fines will be assessed. I laughed out loud when I read that last part, not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. This HOA had a reputation. They'd find a widow for having mismatched flower pots. They'd towed a veteran's truck because it had mud on the tires. They'd once tried to ban Halloween decorations because they were emotionally disruptive. And now, apparently, Christmas lights were the hill they wanted to die on. I walked outside and looked at my house like an inspector would. Everything was clean, symmetrical, neutral. You could have printed it on a holiday postcard. The inflatable Santa was well within height limits. The lights weren't flashing. The wreath wasn't oversized. There was no rule, written or otherwise, that prohibited any of it, which told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about rules, this was about control. I checked the HOA portal next. Sure enough, the violation was already logged, complete with photos taken from the sidewalk, time, stamped, zoomed in like evidence in a trial. They'd been waiting for this, so instead of removing anything, I poured myself a coffee, opened my laptop, and downloaded every single HOA document they had publicly posted: covenants, bylaws, architectural guidelines. Enforcement procedures, fine schedules, appeal timelines. I read them line by line, slowly, carefully, because malicious compliance only works when you understand the rules better than the people trying to weaponize them. By that afternoon, the HOA president, Karen of course, was knocking on my door. She didn't ring the bell. She knocked like she expected obedience. When I opened the door, she gave me the kind of smile people use right before they try to assert authority they don't actually have. "You got the notice," she said, not a question. I did. I replied calmly, "And you understand you're in violation." "I understand you think I am." Her smile tightened. "This neighborhood has standards. So does the law," I said, still polite. She gestured past me toward the decorations. Those lights weren't approved. Holiday decorations don't require prior approval under Section 8. 3 subsection C. I replied without missing a beat. Her eyes flicked for half a second. I'd hit something. That section is subject to board interpretation. She snapped. Only if the interpretation is applied uniformly. I said, which it hasn't been. She crossed her arms. If they're not gone by tomorrow, fines will begin. How much? I asked. $200 per day. I nodded slowly, and if I appeal, you'll still accrue fines during review. Of course. I said, that's very festive. Her face hardened. This is your warning. No, I said gently. This is yours. She scoffed and turned to leave, clearly convinced this was just another homeowner she could bully into compliance. What she didn't realize was that while she'd been knocking on my door, I'd already filed a records request with the city. And what came back was going to turn their entire holiday season into a legal nightmare. Because once you know where to look, HOA tend to leave a very long paper trail, and theirs was about to become public. The records request came back faster than I expected. Turns out when an HOA shares an office address with a city clerk's cousin, paperwork moves quickly. What I received wasn't just meeting minutes, it was years of selective enforcement complaints. Emails, internal warnings, legal advisories they'd ignored. Christmas lights weren't the issue. They'd find people they didn't like and ignored violations from board members entirely. One board member had a 10-foot inflatable snowman. Another had multicolored blinking lights explicitly banned in the same rule they cited against me. That was my leverage, so I filed the appeal, not emotional, not defensive, just citations, photos, dates, names. Then I paid a lawyer to send a single letter. It wasn't threatening, it was surgical. The fines didn't stop. They doubled. By Christmas Eve, they'd posted a notice on my door stating I owed $1,200 and warning of further action. That's when I triggered Phase 2. I sent copies of my appeal and the HOA selective enforcement history to every homeowner on the block. Christmas morning, my phone started buzzing. Turns out people don't like discovering they've been fined while the HOA president ignored her own violations. By noon, Karen was no longer smiling. On December 26th, I filed a formal complaint with the State HOA Oversight Board. Included attachments: proof of unequal enforcement, ignored legal advisories, evidence of retaliation, unauthorized fines. I also filed a request for a temporary injunction. The judge granted it the same day, all fines suspended, all enforcement halted. The HOA was ordered to respond within 10 days. Their holiday party was canceled. Their lawyer resigned. The emergency HOA meeting was chaos. Residents demanded refunds. Someone asked why dues were paying legal settlements instead of snow removal. Karen tried to speak. She was shouted down. Then the audit results dropped. Improper fine collection. Misuse of funds, violations of open meeting laws. The city stepped in. So did the IRS. By mid-January, the board was dissolved. Karen resigned for personal reasons. The HOA attorney sent me an apology letter. They refunded every fine, with interest. They paid my legal fees and they rewrote the bylaws to permanently protect holiday decorations. My Christmas lights stayed up until February. No one complained. The funny thing is, I never raised my voice. I never threatened anyone. I just followed the rules better than they did. And every December now, when the lights come on across the neighborhood, someone always says the same thing. Remember when the HOA tried to cancel Christmas? Yeah. Christmas morning was quiet. Too quiet. No new emails, no knock on the door, no follow-up notices taped to my window like they'd done to others before me. The HOA portal still showed the fines ticking upward, but it felt less like confidence and more like inertia. Like a machine that had been left running because no one wanted to be the one to shut it off. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched my kids open their presents beneath the glow of the tree. The lights outside reflected softly off the snow-dusted sidewalk. Normal, peaceful, and completely unacceptable to people who thrived on manufactured authority. By late morning, my phone buzzed, a text from my next-door neighbor. "Hey, did the HOA fine you for your decorations too?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Yes. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared? Then, they fined us last year for half of that. Karen said it was non-negotiable. That was all it took. I didn't blast an email. I didn't post screenshots on social media. I simply replied with one sentence: "You might want to ask why some houses were never fined at all." The response was immediate. Another neighbor texted, then another. Someone asked if I knew how to access old violation records. Someone else asked whether appeals actually worked or if they were just for show. I answered honestly. By noon, people weren't just curious. They were comparing experiences. Around 1 o'clock, a group message formed. Then another. Screenshots started circulating. Photos of decorations that had never received citations. Dates, amounts, emails that had gone unanswered, and then someone posted it. A photo of Karen's house, 10-foot inflatable nutcracker, multicolored lights flashing in patterns, garland wrapped around the mailbox, explicitly prohibited under the same section I'd been cited for. No violation notice. The tone shifted instantly. By mid-afternoon, the HOA office phone was ringing nonstop. I knew because the secretary emailed me. By mistake, she'd meant to forward it internally. Residents are upset. Multiple complaints about inconsistent enforcement. Karen says to hold all calls until Monday, 3 days away on Christmas. That email told me everything. They weren't planning to fix this. They were hoping it would cool down, so I made sure it didn't. At 3:17 p.m., I sent a single message to the group chat. I filed an appeal and a formal records request. If anyone wants copies of what I found, I'm happy to share. Within minutes, my inbox flooded. I sent the files, not commentary, not opinions, just documents. By evening, the narrative was no longer one homeowner arguing with the HOA. It was the HOA has been lying to us. At 7:42 p.m., Karen finally emailed me directly. Her tone was completely different now. Given the timing of the holiday, perhaps we can discuss a temporary accommodation until the board meets. Temporary accommodation. I didn't respond. Because less than 10 minutes later, someone forwarded me an email Karen had sent to another homeowner that same evening. This issue is being exaggerated. Please refrain from spreading misinformation. Attached to that forwarded message was a screenshot of Karen's own decorations. That's when the anger stopped being quiet. An emergency HOA meeting was demanded. Residents cited bylaws requiring transparency. Someone mentioned the attorney's warning email. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd received it in the past. By the time Christmas night ended, the group chat had over 40 participants. People weren't asking if the HOA was wrong anymore. They were asking how long it had been wrong. At 11:58 p.m., my lawyer emailed me, "Good news." He wrote, "They're panicking. That's usually when mistakes happen." He was right, because the next morning, December 26th, Karen made one. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email, defensive, rambling, poorly worded. She doubled down. She claimed enforcement discretion. She dismissed selective enforcement concerns. She warned against hostile conduct toward board members. And at the bottom, she threatened increased fines for continued defiance. That email went straight into my attorney's hands, and within an hour, we filed the complaint that would turn their holiday mess into a legal one. Because once threats are documented, the rules stop protecting the people who misuse them and start protecting the people who waited patiently. The complaint wasn't dramatic. That's what made it dangerous. It was filed quietly, electronically, early in the morning while most of the board was still congratulating themselves for standing firm. No press. No confrontation. Just a clean legal filing with exhibits attached and citations that left very little room for interpretation. Selective enforcement, retaliatory fines, failure to follow appeal procedures. Threats issued during an active dispute, each point backed by their own documents. By 9:30 a.m., the State HOA Oversight Office acknowledged receipt. By 11:00, they requested additional materials. By lunchtime, my attorney received a call asking whether we were seeking immediate relief. We were. The injunction request went in that afternoon. Temporary, narrow, precise, suspend all fines, halt all enforcement actions related to holiday decorations, preserve records, prohibit retaliation. The judge didn't need theatrics. The exhibits spoke for themselves. At 4:12 p.m., the order was granted. The HOA was officially instructed to stop. No more fines, no further notices, no collection actions. And most importantly, they were ordered to respond formally in writing within 10 days. The timing couldn't have been worse for them, because that same evening, Karen tried to regain control. She posted a notice on the HOA website claiming temporary administrative delays and assuring residents everything was under review. Except the injunction was public record and someone shared it. By nightfall, the neighborhood knew the HOA had been legally restrained from enforcing its own rules. That's when the fear set in. Emails started flying internally. I know because several were accidentally sent to me, still included on older distribution lists they hadn't bothered to clean up. One board member asked if fines already collected would have to be returned. Another asked whether ignoring their attorney's prior warnings could expose them personally. Someone else asked, plainly, whether they needed separate counsel. Karen's responses were short now, defensive. Delayed, she stopped issuing directives and started asking questions. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following evening. Closed session. Residents weren't invited. That alone violated the bylaws. So someone filed a complaint about that too. The oversight office added it to the case file. Meanwhile, the HOA attorney withdrew. No announcement, no explanation. Just a brief notice posted to the portal stating the firm would no longer be representing the association effective immediately. That sent shockwaves through the board, because attorneys don't walk away from easy clients. They walk away when they're being ignored, and documented doing so. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Different tone entirely. They acknowledged receipt of the injunction, confirmed suspension of fines, requested good faith dialogue. I forwarded it to my attorney and said nothing. By then, the damage was already spreading. Homeowners started requesting refunds. Others demanded access to financial records. Someone noticed legal expenses had doubled in a single quarter. Someone else realized reserve funds had been dipped into without a vote. The Oversight Office requested a full audit. The city requested copies. The holiday decorations stayed up, untouched, unchallenged, and for the first time since this started, the HOA wasn't setting deadlines anymore. They were reacting to them, because once regulators get involved, the rules change, and once people realize they're not alone, compliance stops being automatic. By the end of the week, Karen hadn't knocked on a single door. She didn't need to. The audit request changed everything, Until then, the board could still pretend this was a misunderstanding, a disagreement over decorations that had spiraled a little too far. Audits don't allow that kind of storytelling. Audits want numbers, receipts, approvals, and signatures, and that's where things started to fall apart. The first sign was the delay. The Oversight Office requested financial records within 5 business days. On day 4, the HOA asked for an extension, citing holiday scheduling conflicts. The extension was denied. By day 6, residents were asking why the records hadn't been released. By day 7, someone discovered the HOA online financial portal had gone offline for maintenance. That move backfired immediately. People started requesting documents individually, certified letters, formal demands, copies sent to the city, the state, and the Oversight Office all at once. You can ignore one request. You can't ignore 50. The records, when they finally came out, were worse than anyone expected. Fines collected without proper notice, late fees applied during active appeals, legal expenses paid without board votes. Thousands moved between accounts labeled administrative adjustment. Someone noticed a line item for consulting services that led back to a company owned by a board member's cousin. That discovery spread fast. The next HOA meeting, still labeled informational, was standing room only. People filled the chairs, the walls, the hallway outside. Phones were out. Voices were calm, but they weren't polite anymore. Karen tried to open the meeting by reminding everyone of decorum. No one listened. The first question wasn't about Christmas lights. It was, why did you fine some people and not others? She gave a practiced answer about discretion and context. Someone interrupted her and read aloud from the bylaws. Another resident asked why fines were charged during appeals when the rules explicitly prohibited it. Karen looked to the treasurer. The treasurer didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and said he needed to clarify his role and would be stepping away pending legal advice. That's when people realized this wasn't just mismanagement. It was self-preservation. One by one, board members started distancing themselves. Emails were sent retracting prior statements. Someone claimed they'd never seen certain documents before approving them. Another said they'd raised concerns that were overruled. Karen was suddenly very alone at the front of the room. Someone asked if the board would commit to refunding improperly collected fines. Silence. Someone else asked whether reserve funds had been used to cover legal expenses. More silence. Then someone asked the question that ended it. Did the HOA ignore its own attorney's warning about selective enforcement? That email had been leaked. Karen's face went rigid. She said nothing. The meeting dissolved into side conversations after that. Not shouting planning, people exchanged contact information, committees formed without permission, someone mentioned a recall vote. By the next morning, Karen resigned. The message was short, vague, citing personal reasons and unnecessary stress. It didn't calm anyone, because once people start reading documents, apologies stop working. The remaining board members followed within days. One stepped down quietly. Another stopped responding to emails altogether. The treasurer formally requested an independent review to protect himself from liability. The HOA, as an authority, effectively ceased to function. The Oversight Office appointed a temporary administrator. All fines were frozen. Refunds were ordered. Legal fees were no longer paid by the HOA. And suddenly, the people who'd once knocked on doors issuing citations were answering questions instead of asking them. Through all of it, I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The decorations stayed up. The lights came on every night. Neighbors waved when they walked past. Some even added a little more to their own displays, cautiously at first, then confidently. Because the thing about control is that once it breaks, it doesn't quietly come back together. It collapses under the weight of everything it was hiding. And this was only the beginning of the cleanup. Once the temporary administrator stepped in, everything slowed down. Not in the way chaos slows things, where nothing gets done, but in the way careful people move when they know every decision will be reviewed. Emails became formal. Conversations were documented. No one issued instructions without written authority. And for the first time since this started, the rules were actually followed. The administrator's first action was simple: stop all discretionary enforcement. No warnings, no notices, no interpretations. Only clear, written violations of city code could be addressed, and only after notice and response periods were honored. That alone changed the tone of the neighborhood. The second action was financial. Every fine issued during an active appeal was flagged. Every penalty tied to selective enforcement was marked for review. Late fees assessed without proper notice were automatically voided. People began receiving credits on their accounts. Then checks, not symbolic refunds, actual money returned with explanations attached. My attorney forwarded me a summary before it went public. The HOA would be refunding all fines related to aesthetic violations over the past 18 months. Legal fees associated with defending those fines would be reimbursed to affected homeowners. The total was substantial, enough that the reserve fund had to be rebuilt over time, enough that the board's former confidence now looked like recklessness. Karen didn't reappear. Her name was removed from the HOA website. Her email address stopped working. Someone mentioned she'd hired her own lawyer. Another said she was selling her house. I didn't ask. The bylaws were next. The administrator proposed revisions that removed vague language, words like appropriate, tasteful, and in keeping with community standards. Those phrases had been the foundation of discretionary enforcement. They were replaced with measurable limits and clear timelines. Holiday decorations were explicitly protected, not just Christmas, all holidays, all cultural observances, display periods defined, restrictions limited. Approval requirements removed entirely unless structural changes were involved. The vote passed unanimously. No one wanted ambiguity anymore. The Oversight Office closed its investigation shortly after, issuing a final report that was blunt without being dramatic. The HOA had failed to follow its own rules. Selective enforcement had occurred. Corrective measures were mandatory. No fines, no penalties, just compliance. My attorney sent me the final invoice. It was zero. The HOA covered it, along with a written apology acknowledging the improper enforcement actions and confirming my account balance was cleared in full. I read it once and filed it away. By February, the decorations came down naturally. Not because of a deadline, not because anyone asked, just because the season was over. No one hurried me, no one watched. Life returned to something close to normal, except it wasn't quite the same. Neighbors talked more. People asked questions at meetings. Financial statements were actually read. Decisions were slower, but they were transparent. And every December after that, the lights came back, some simple, some elaborate, some a little excessive. No one complained, because everyone remembered what happened the last time someone tried to control something that didn't belong to them. The strange thing was how quickly it all faded from daily conversation. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was resolved the way things are supposed to be resolved, cleanly, decisively, and without lingering drama. The people who had abused their authority were gone. The systems that allowed it had been corrected. There was nothing left to argue about. Spring came, then summer. New board members were elected, most of them reluctantly. Ordinary neighbors who never wanted power, only predictability. Meetings were shorter, agendas were posted in advance, votes were recorded, no one knocked on doors anymore. The HOA stopped feeling like something hovering over the neighborhood. It became administrative again. By the time December rolled around the following year, the memory surfaced quietly. Someone asked in the group chat whether holiday lights were allowed yet. Another replied with a screenshot of the revised bylaws. Someone else added a laughing emoji and said, allowed and protected. That was the end of the discussion. The lights went up earlier than usual that year, not out of defiance, out of comfort. I watched from my porch as neighbors decorated without looking over their shoulders. Kids helped string lights. Music drifted softly from open garages. It felt lighter, not because of the decorations, but because no one was waiting to be corrected. On Christmas Eve, a couple stopped by with cookies. They'd been among the first to ask questions the year before. We talked about nothing important, weather, work, how fast the year had gone. As they were leaving, one of them paused. Hey, he said, nodding toward my house, you know this whole thing started because of you, right? I shrugged. It started because someone overreached, he smiled. Fair enough. That night, I turned the lights on and stood back for a moment. They weren't brighter than before. They weren't bigger. They just were. And that was the point. I never set out to ruin anyone's holiday. I didn't plan a takedown. I didn't want revenge in the dramatic sense. I just refused to be pushed quietly. Everything that followed came from that refusal, and from the simple act of reading the rules instead of fearing them. Every year since, when the neighborhood lights come on, someone inevitably brings it up. Remember when the HOA tried to cancel Christmas? They usually laugh when they say it. The HOA doesn't. They remember too. Because once an organization learns that its authority depends on fairness, and that the people it governs are willing to check, it never forgets. and neither do the people who proved it.